Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Jack Parsons got me on the moon. Well, good evening, everybody, in this dust-filled Hocus Pocus episode 11. The reason why dust is swirling around is because I pulled a book off the bookshelf from the archives, and it's like a medieval library here, and I hadn't read this one in years, and I'm terrifically pulling it out, so it's true dust all over the place. So they're not jinns flying around. That's actually dust. I know what some of you are like. Well, welcome to episode 11, the magic number of Hocus Pocus, and I'm Thomas Sheridan.
And I'm Sara Mondaini.
And we're delighted to have you here and back for another adventure into the 40 and the mysterious, the paranormal, and keeping Sunday nights safe for high strangeness. How are you, Sara?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. And I'm really pleased with the response to last week's show. Back to our usual format this evening of Thomas and myself, and we've packed out episode full of high strangeness and good crack, and we're really glad to have you all with us again this week. Yeah. How's your week been? How was the Isle of Man?
I just got back from the Isle of Man, and the primary purpose there was to continue my studies between the rollover period between late paganism and early Christianity, and myself and Neil had a fantastic time there. And I got a lot of new data and a lot of new information that's only copper fastened what I'd already believed, which is important. And it's quite a magical place. It's like what the UK and Ireland was 40, 50 years ago. It's a bit of a time warp, but it's a very civilized place of hardworking people. And it's quite big. I was surprised by the size of the place. It has like seriously proper mountains and plains and forests. It really is Middle Earth in so many ways. It's got little shires all over it. So I'd highly recommend anyone who wants to go to the Isle of Man. You'll love it. The first topic of the evening is, and Sarah's going to do the introduction, is astral traveling.
Yeah, astral traveling. It's something we've all experienced, some intentionally, some unintentionally, and some people don't know they've experienced it at all. There's many thoughts and opinions and scientific papers on this subject, but I wanted to start off tonight and just give my own thoughts on it. Like, we all have an astral body, a soul or a spirit, if you will, and consciousness uses that etheric body as a vehicle to travel through the astral planes. And I believe that etheric body is the true essence of who we are. And we need the physical body to live on the earth. And we take that form, obviously, when we incarnate here. And the astral body is connected to the physical body via a silver cord. When you go to sleep, your physical body sleeps, and your conscious mind or your rational mind kind of steps aside for the 6 to 8 hours that you're sleeping. And that's when the magic happens. So, for example, if inspiration comes or solutions to problems come while you're asleep, then the answer to a solution is often there when you wake up. And the physical body needs sleep, but the astral body doesn't need any sleep. So while the physical body's sleeping, the astral body is up and off and out, exploring and playing and learning, and it can travel anywhere in just a thought. So who's to say that a strange dream you had, maybe of flying over somebody's house, flying over a friend's house and floating down through the roof, is just a vivid dream where you saw everything clearly, what they were doing and what they were saying in great detail. And then the next day you recall the dream to your friend and they look surprised because that's exactly what they were doing. How could you have possibly known? And billions of people are astral traveling right now in this moment, and they're in the space that you're in right now, but they're unseen. And other worlds and dimensions do exist all around us, and they're unseen because the non-physical dimensions of existence are vibrating at a higher frequency than our known physical universe, and that makes them invisible to the five senses. And as well as that, there's also non-physical laws governing those dimensions, and the astral body can affect its perception through thought. So it can be in one spot in one moment, and then it can move to the other side of the world in just the blink of an eye. And that's why outer body experiences report that they can change the scenery just by thinking about it. Now, an outer body experience shouldn't be confused with a near-death experience, because yes, they both involve being out of the body, but they are a very different set of circumstances. And maybe we could cover near-death experiences on another episode. But what's your thoughts on astral projection?
I've never experienced it, sadly, much to my regret and envy. And some people think that just never happened to me. I've tried it. I've tried the exercises. I've done the book exercises. It's never happened naturally or on purpose. I'm fascinated by it. I believe it. And I just wish I could. There's just something inhibiting me from it. The thing that always fascinates me is the silvery rope. Well, what are your theories on that silvery rope phenomena part of it?
I think it's like the physical body. When you're connected to, when you're in your mother's stomach, you have the in the womb, you have the umbilical cord, don't you? So I think it's kind of an etheric umbilical cord to where we've come from originally, and it keeps us tethered to the physical body and allows us to go off on our travels. And I think it's silver because when you're out of the body, or if you've ever seen spirits or ghosts, they do have this silvery hue about them. And I just think that is to do with how our eyes perceive that frequency. It may not be silver in reality, but I think that's how we see it. So I do think it's some kind of etheric umbilical cord.
Another thing too, reading about it, people often describe the sensation of falling backwards out of their body. Have you ever experienced that, Sara?
Yeah, I've got an experience I'll recall to you actually. I was floating about 2 inches above my body in bed. And in the next second, I was actually in a woodland area by a rough sea. And I remember the stars and the moon being out, and there was a man in a brown cloak, and he had a pointed hood, and he came over and started to talk to me, and he was telling me things that were really important. And next thing, I was wide awake in bed. But as I came back, it's like the sensation of being on a roller coaster and going over the dip and going down in the stomach, and you get that feeling in the stomach, and then it's kind of like you fall backwards, like you've dropped off a cliff backwards. And when I came, and also at that point, I get like a popping noise in the ear, like somebody's burst a balloon in my ear. And that's when I wake up and I'm back in bed. And with regards to the man in the pointy hat and the cloak, when I woke up, I had all the memories of seeing him and all the vivid colours and imagery, but I couldn't remember one word of the conversation that we had. Even now, when I recall the experience, it's like watching a film with the sound off. Everything was so vivid except what the man was saying to me. So I just have to trust that whatever it was, it's in my subconscious for when I need it.
I've often read about stories of people who traveled outside the Earth's atmosphere into space and were able to look back down on the Earth from space and see the silvery cord extending all back down to the Earth where they came from. Have you heard about that one? Have you experienced that one?
No, never heard about that one. No.
Yeah, they could go all the way. A few cases people describe going into space and looking down at the Earth from space. Do you ever meet anyone else who's in the process of astral traveling while you're doing it?
No, I haven't. But I do believe, because I've talked to you about it before, you know, I see quite a lot of spirits or ghosts can wake up in the night and see people walking through the bedroom. I do think a lot of those may be astral travelers, because I did mention one to you the other week. I said a lady had walked through the bedroom and she had a blue a polka dot house coat on, dressing gown. And I actually think that that was an astral traveler, because she just walked straight through. She was just walking through.
What
So,
about I've also heard stories of you could travel way outside your body and then suddenly you're thrown back into it at high speed, like a jet, like a supersonic jet. Have you experienced that one?
no.
Is there ever a fear of the cord breaking?
No, when I've been out, I mean, I've not gone out intentionally. I've just found myself out there. I don't know how to do it intentionally or how to control it, or how to go here or there. But it's never been on my mind when I've been out that I might not get back. It's just not entered my head. But I don't think it is. I don't think it can break. And I think that what you mentioned about being yanked back into the body suddenly, that I actually do recall reading about that. That could be when the alarm clock goes off. So you could be, say, over in New York having a look round in the astral, and it's 7 a.m. and the alarm clock goes off. You're going to be yanked back because you're waking up.
Yeah, I've done kind of imagination traveling, a visualization traveling, but that's not the same thing. It's just like in my mind, I imagine myself floating up through the ceiling, through the rafters, out into the sky, and going somewhere. But that's just pure imagination. That's in your mind's eye. But when did you have it as a little girl?
I remember, in fact, I remember the year. It was 1987. And I was in bed. There was a next door neighbours were having a party, so it was quite loud. And I was drifting in and out of sleep. And it was I noticed that I was above my body, and I could see, and it made me jump. And the minute you realise, you go back in, and then I get this balloon sound, like somebody's literally got a pin and they put it in a balloon in your ear, and it's just this almighty popping noise.
So it's like a muscle you can train to stay longer and longer out of it.
You can. I've never learned to do that or trained myself to do that. It's just when I've gone out accidentally or been aware of it. It's but I can't think. Once I'm out there, I don't think, oh, I think I'll just go and have a look here, or I'll go and see this person. It's not in my head. It's not in my head at all. Like that man that I saw with the cloak by the seaside. Well, we were on some cliffs on a very rough sea in a forest woodland. No idea who that was or how I got there. I didn't go there intentionally. No idea. Maybe it's he knew me and he called me there. I don't know. I couldn't say. But it's not all romantic like that. I do recall one time recently, I floated into my parents' back garden down onto the washing line. And I was actually tightrope walking along the washing line. And I was actually aware that time I'm out of the body. And I felt really cold and clammy, like sticky, like you've walked into a big cobweb. And eventually I'd had enough. I didn't like the sensation. It was really strange. And I went back, and as I woke again, I had that falling sensation and the popping balloon noise in my ears, and then usually followed by sitting bolt upright, like what was that? There are plenty of books on how to do it, but if you're going to go for a book about this, I would go for one of the old school books, what those that were written in the 60s and 70s. Dolores Cannon also has some nice books about it. But as I say, it's not something I know how to control or how to do it consciously.
Well, so thanks for that, Sarah. Thanks for your input. I've never experienced it. Like I said, it's just like such a bizarre sounding thing to me. It's something I'm quite envious of, that I can't, other people can and I can't, but hey, that's just the way it is. If any of you watching this have these experiences, let us know in the comments, because I want to learn more about this from people's experiences, because this is not only a show and it's not only a comment section, it's also research. Think of it as a college. or a university or something like that, a lecture, where you can all add your own piece to the story and piece to the puzzle. So if you'd like to add to Sarah's comments about astral traveling, some of your own or some of your theories about it, light up the comments section. That's what it's there for. Astral traveling. The name kind of is a bit strange to me, but it should be called, like, I don't know, consciousness, I don't know, excursion, I don't know, it's whatever. But the name always was sound a bit hippie to me or something. But you know,
Dennis Wheatley brings astral projection or astral traveling into his stories quite a lot, especially in regards to the Nazi spies and of World War II. And there are stories that the Nazis, the SS soldiers in the Nazis, did know how to do it and did use it to spy on the enemy during the war.
On this week's Folk Horror Cinema, we have a film that's kind of become the epitome of the topic. It's probably the first genuine folk horror cinema film we've actually, in that genre, we've covered since we began this series. If you'd ask people, the average person, classic examples of folk horror cinema movie, chances are they'd name this one. No, it's not The Wicker Man. That would probably be everyone's number one choice. It's the 2013 Ben Wheatley film, A Field in England. Now, a lot of people have trouble with this film. A lot of people have difficulty with it. It has some quite intense sensory aspects to it. It's filmed in black and white, so it has the kind of vibe of Bergman's The Seventh Seal, with the kind of elements of Straw Dogs. But it's a different thing again. It takes place during the English Civil War, and you have a bizarre scene where it starts off where you hear a battle on the other side of this hedgerow, and this person appears, who we find out later is this individual called Whitehead, appears out of the hedgerow. He's panicking, he's terrified, and he's in great fear. He apparently is being chased by his commanding officer, someone who's ordering him around. A melee takes place, and he suddenly finds himself in a field with 3 other individuals. And this field is almost like a different reality from what he just left. They are basically trying to find their way across a field towards an alehouse. And these 3 characters couldn't be more different from him. Whitehead is educated. He's kind of like a clerkish, bookish type. And we find out that he was in the employment of an astrologer and an alchemist in Norwich, who had papers stolen from him by an individual we find out later called O'Neill. We encountered him after we have these character studies of each of their personality types as they're walking across this field in black and white. And they find a strange yew tree, which is like a fence post that has strange carvings on it. And they seemingly, after eating a meal of magic mushrooms, pull O'Neill out of the ground. He appears out of the ground. And Whitehead realizes that O'Neill is the individual that stole his master's papers on magic and alchemy and so on. Now, the reason why O'Neill has stolen the papers is because he's searching for buried treasure, which actually appears in this, it's actually buried below this field. And his purpose is he has summoned all 4 of them into the field for that purpose. Whitehead's job is to be almost like a Renfield who can find the treasure buried in where it is in the field. But he's also kind of an innocent. He's also a coward. And O'Neill possesses him with a demon and uses him as a human divination rod. In a quite disturbing scene where he's screaming inside a tent in agony. The other 3 members think he's the devil, that they think O'Neill is the devil. And they become almost bewitched by him. Now, what goes on for the rest of the film is sometimes very brutal, often very sensory overloading, sometimes completely surrealist, where there's imagery of them posing as if you're looking at a painting by Rembrandt or something like this. But the film, if you stick with it and you deal with all the intensity of it, it actually has a remarkably beautiful message at the end, that the film is really about the true meaning of magic and what magic is used for, the development of the self, the betterment of the self and improving of the self. And while O'Neill is obsessed with using the magic that he has stolen in order to find buried treasure, Whitehead, on the other hand, through a kind of a process of alchemical osmosis, the hero's journey, discovers that the true meaning of life, the true meaning of magic, is the better of the self, the bettering of the self, while the other three companions, these three big ones and these three individuals that he encountered as refugees, almost like social refugees, outcasts from the English Civil War, discover the true nature of friendship. And what starts out as quite a, and continues as quite a brutal, intense, dark movie with plenty of disturbing scenes, kind of ends up something remarkably beautiful. I'm not going to tell what happens at the end, but it's classic. If anyone who knows the difference between black magic and white magic will actually get a field in England. And when you watch it to the end, it's like you forget all the intensity along the way, and you're left with this transformation of a man into who he was meant to be. And that's A Field in England. And that's my review of it. And Sarah, what did you think of it?
Now, this film, well, I could sit here and give you an aficionado type review about it, about the poetry and the concept and the message and how I perceive the film. But I'd be lying to myself and I'd be lying to you guys too. I just didn't get it. I love Reece Shearsmith. I thought he played a great part, but I couldn't understand what the hell was going on. No. First I thought maybe Whitehead was an occult practitioner and he was up to something dark for his master. Then I thought, maybe they're all dead and trapped in limbo in this field in England and they don't know it yet. Then it dawned on me. They were on the way to an ale house after the battle and they got lost, and one of the men cooked them some soup or a broth or something using the mushrooms in the fields, which unbeknown to them were hallucinogenic. And the remainder of the film was one long horrible trip. So yeah, it was some men in the field having a bad trip for some mushrooms is what I took from this film. And I apologize if I've missed some artistic concept.
Don't feel that at all, because it's probably 2 or 3 times to get it. It's definitely a challenging film.
Yeah,
it definitely is not an easy watch at first, but if you stick with it at the end, what has happened is they've entered into a magical space. They've entered in a magical space of which, even although O'Neill seems to be the occultist in charge of it, is greater than the sum of its parts. He's also part of this. It's if you look at the transformation of Whitehead's character at the end, you see he starts off as a sniveling coward, this like almost soy boy type, terrified of his own shadow. At the end, he becomes a man. At the end, he transforms himself into a higher purpose of himself. He's not just the clerk of an alchemist anymore. It's almost like the magician's apprentice has become the magician. And he has to cross that threshold of all the things he fears, such as brutality, honesty about himself, confronting the failed aspects of his own personality. And, there's some scenes in it that are just mind-blowing, like when he's examining the guy's willy for venereal disease. It's like, what, this kind of thing. But I mean, it's the kind of film you have to like watch a few times to get it. And it is what's the word? Disjointed in many ways on purpose, I think. But the end scene with the three of them in the field, I think is very powerful. I think the O'Neill character is loosely based on an Edward Kelly type. I think I love that line where the Essex guy turns around and goes, "Trust the devil to be an Irishman." I had to burst out laughing when he said that. But yeah, it was great. I mean, it's not family viewing, but it is like a folk horror classic, and it's held in that high regard. I also love the look of it. It's a black and white film, but really it's really a grayscale film, because it looks like it was filmed in color and then made grayscale. So it's not strictly a black and white film. The tonality is the range of it is quite full. And I'll tell you the story in relationship to something that we're going to talk about later, missing time. I had an experience like that in a field growing up, where I walked into a field with a friend called Kevin Tucker, and it was a beautiful hot summer's day. And when we crossed the hedgerow, we suddenly felt incredibly tired, and we couldn't explain it. Like something had knocked us out, like we'd been, gassed, or had chloroform put on us or something. We fell deeply asleep and both had mad dreams. So that could have, and then hours had passed when we woke up, and we were looking at each other like, what just happened? So we could have encountered spores from mushrooms as well, in that sense. But there's also something of the hedgerow being used as a demarcation line between the brutality of the English Civil War and these personal journeys that people have. And I mean, the comments should be good about this if you guys are going to watch it or haven't seen it. But it's one of those films that you have to work with it. And so don't feel bad that you didn't really gel with it. It's almost like a psychedelic trip in itself, that film.
I will say there are a few good points about it. When you make films, or you're learning to make films, which is what I'm currently doing, you do watch movies with a different eye, and the cinematography and the special effects, and as you say, the use of the grayscale on it was outstanding, and it was so creative. And those were the aspects on it that I was focusing on, thinking, wow, look at that, how have they done that?
Well, when he was taking the high doses of mushrooms willingly, remember that at the end, he takes a whitehead rather than unknowingly being given the mushrooms because he refuses the soup. Remember that at the beginning?
Yeah.
This is a guy who won't confront his own consciousness. So he dives right into it as a matter of survival, and he's woofing down the Liberty Caps, right? But those special effects that they used of O'Neill with the split screen, it looked like the video from When Doves Cry with Prince in it, where he's moving his cloak like it's so simple. It's just a split screen, but it looks mind blowing. It looks so cool.
I think there a warning at the beginning. I think if you've got epilepsy, may cause epileptic fits. Some of the scenes, there was a warning at the beginning, and there was a lot of flashing imagery.
Fast jump cuts between characters. Yeah. But also the fact that what they found, I won't say what they found, but what the treasure was supposed to be, was they found the meaning of life, their own mortality, and this kind of thing. The film was really a very good insight into magic, to be honest with you, because it all the things you need to go through, the pain, the torture. This, it's not the new age magic, it's the real thing, And there was kind of like annihilation, gnosis, and there was almost like Renfielding, and there was a demonology, there was hallucinogenics to actually break down people, have strict senses of, literal consciousness and so on like that. There was dying, and resurrection was a really big part of it. It was a really big part of it. But, and the fact that they didn't show the battles, I really liked that. You just heard them from the other side of the hedgerow. The hedgerow was the demarcation line between one version of reality and another. It was a field in England, but I think you could double play on the word field. Field literally, as that it was a field in a farmer's land, but also field as it was the field in the quantum sense. The exterior of this reality, the margins,
like in a liminal.
Yeah, the margins of this reality, a disturbance in the field. So I don't worry about it. Lots of people have said what you just said. Don't feel bad.
There was one scene actually that they used Whitehead as an actual human divinator.
Yes, That's after he put the demon inside him in the tent. He was screaming in terror, and the thing ended him, and he was walking around like a dog almost.
It was hideous. That it was horrific.
Yeah. You know, that's O'Neill was the one who used magic. You see, that's the whole thing. That's what the film teaches us. O'Neill used magic for his own personal gain, regardless of what it did to other people. Where Whitehead used magic to better himself. And maybe the two of them could be seen as an allegory for John Dee and Kelly, because a lot of people always said that John Dee was a very likable and gentle Englishman, where Kelly was kind of like what he was portrayed like by O'Neill in that film, a much darker individual, you know. And he used Dee in many ways. And so maybe there was kind of a play on their relationship brought into the film, between the relationship between Whitehead and O'Neill.
Yeah. Maybe I'll watch it again with a different eye now.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's so visceral when you first see it. There's some really nasty scenes of shootings and things like that, and stabbings and mutilations. But they're not super gory, but they're enough to like. And then you have this constant drum that bang, you know, that I think it's very powerful actually, that drumming section. But then you have these frozen scenes where they look like a Rembrandt painting or something. You know, I mean, it has its flaws, and has a lot of flaws. But having said that, at the end, it has this kind of sort of grand resolution at the end. That does happen.
There's a lot less of the imagination as to what went on in that tent with the screaming as well. Goodness knows what was going on.
Yeah, he was probably forcing a demon into him somehow, and him being a Christian. See, remember, he was a pious, devout Christian before it, but afterwards he was an innocent. I mean, O'Neill even says that to him one time. He says he compare him to a virgin, you know, as a sort of like a consciousness virgin. And that's why he needed him. He needed his innocence, the innocence of a fool, you know, that kind of thing. And O'Neill was not a hard man. Sorry, Whitehead was not a hard man. He wasn't a tough man, but he has to become that at the end. So that was this week's folk horror cinema review, A Field in England. We're doing something a little different for next week and the weeks after. And Sara wants to introduce this one. So tell us what we're going to do, Sara.
Okay, well, we got a really nice comment left on last week's episode from somebody called Chris Newell, and he made a suggestion, and he says, "Great show as always." Thank you, Chris. "I'd like to make a suggestion. Have the film review section as a type of book club thingy. Tell us all what to watch and then review next week. Anyway, well done and very much enjoying the broadcast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you which film that we'll be reviewing next week. So if you want to spend this week finding it and watching it yourselves, then you can listen to our review about it, and maybe you can put your own thoughts and feelings about it in the comments as well, and it'd be really interesting to read and to see the different opinions on the film. So for next week, I got to choose. So I've chosen Dario Argento's 1977 classic Gothic horror, Suspiria.
Thank you, Chris. That was an excellent suggestion, and great suggestion for a film, Sara. Yeah, I'll bring it on. I mean, that film, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but yeah, it's part of that remarkable trilogy he did based on the three hell cities of Europe. Turin, Basel, and Budapest. And he also included San Francisco in it. So it's very interesting. I'll leave it at that, but yeah, it's a fantastic film, and I can already hear in my head that prog rock soundtrack. So get watching, guys. Our second... One of the most cryptic and, for me, most fascinating hinterlands of half-hidden history is that shadowland and deception-filled story of the crossover period from paganism to early Christianity. On the surface, the mainstream historians and theologians have cultivated a narrative that this time in history was for the most part a brief and mainly peaceful transitional period between the old and the new faith. Yet outside the world of academia and true belief, it becomes apparent that the evidence for this short and almost formal, as we are told, transition simply isn't to be found. The overlapping contradictions are numerous and baffling. This is telling us something of a far deeper story, and a story that itself is filled with hidden history, which has been deliberately censored, not only to protect the guilty and their victors' version of history, but also to alter timelines. Timelines altered so as to hide the fact that modern Christianity piggybacked most of its beliefs, rituals, traditions, and even landscapes and sacred places upon the earlier pagan tradition. It was the only means by which Christianity was ever going to survive in Northern Europe. One of the most powerful locations in Europe for which to uncover this hidden legacy is a rock cliff face in the north of England. This small, picturesque building is known as St. Patrick's Chapel in Haysham in Lancashire, and is set in a spectacular and fantastically mysterious coastal, medieval and earlier ecclesiastical site. The church itself, as well as the remaining ruins just above it, afford stunning views of Morecambe Bay across the water to the Cumbria Fells. In British terms, the location is a rare standing example of an early medieval chapel, surrounded by a cemetery of 10th and 11th century knights' graves, as well as strange and seemingly symbolically cut rock graves chiseled into the hillside above the chapel. The eagle-eyed among you might recognize this particular example from the cover of the Best of Black Sabbath CD. The earliest part of the chapel is dated to the 8th century, later enlarged at either end to the building that we now see today. The tiny south doorway is from the earliest part of the structure. The northeast gable contains another sculptured stone fragment with moulded borders, and this is regarded as a gable finial of the 9th century or later. Within the chapel cemetery itself, there are 13 graves of men and women. One adult example is a female burial wrapped in a shroud in the Southern Cemetery, in the classic Viking Anglo-Saxon style, but alleged to be from the early Christian period, although this is far from conclusive. This is when the mysterious origins of the entire complex come into play. The site at Haysham suddenly stops being Christian and starts to appear very pagan indeed. Such is the complexity of the location, one has to wonder why Christian knights are buried next to Viking and Anglo-Saxon warriors, pagan warriors. Clearly this presents a story of the entire location being far more relevant to the pagan-Christian crossover story
than is associated with the completely fictional story of St. Patrick having founded the site. St. Patrick himself, a fictional individual whose name and stories seem more akin to a kind of code for what really took place when people of Northwest Europe were told to give up their old gods and embrace the desert god of the Middle East. The numerous cut graves themselves, scattered all around the adjacent higher areas above the chapel, speak of a veneration in the landscape itself, as if the very stone in the hillside is sacred. Now the real story starts to unfold. Above the chapel area itself is a woodland, which is a stereotypical druid sacred grove, which contains all manner of interesting and cryptic stones, as well as strange megalithic structures practically ignored by the archaeologists, something we see in similar sites all over this part of Europe. When one enters this part of the sacred landscape, the Christian narrative dissolves rather quickly, and the pagan magical story begins to emerge. The obvious conclusion is that this part of Morecambe Bay was a sacred landscape long before even the Abrahamic religions themselves, and not just the story of Christianity, was created. That the numerous groups who came to Haitian knew and respected this, and hence why pagan Vikings and Anglo-Saxons venerated the locations with its ancient cut rock tombs and Sylvian groves of oak, ash and holly. Then, when the Christians arrived, they knew that such a deep spiritual legacy could not be erased from the local consciousness, so they made sure to carry on the spiritual identity of the hillside, only to eventually, over the better part of a millennium when one objectively examines the history, to finally Christianize the sacred landscape with the usual St. Patrick cover story. This hillside in the north of England was an ancient pagan site that the Christians attempted to take over and convert in such a manner so as to disguise the true nature and length of time it took for Christianity to take over and absorb the pagan world, and to eventually make sure that no memories were left in the human consciousness of this ever having been anything other than Christian. Spoiler alert, their plan hasn't succeeded. This is Thomas Sheridan in Haitian, Lancashire, reporting for Hocus Focus.
Our second topic tonight is one that was a huge part of my validation of the Fortean. It was a story and an amazing thing that made me realize that the Fortean had tremendous value to it. Back in the mid-80s, I was looking through a bookstore and I found a book by Robert Temple called The Sirius Mystery. And what the book was about was Robert Temple, when he was a younger man in England, had encountered this guy who was reading a book on the mysterious tribes of Africa. And this guy told him about a group called the Dogon, who lived in Mali in Western Africa. And just casually said, you know, these guys know that Sirius has a binary star. And, well, did they see it? Was it possible? And he says, no, you can't even see it with a telescope. It has been found, you know, they know it's there because of the wobble in Sirius orbit, but they know there's a Sirius B star. So Temple went and found there was lots of information on this in French by French antiquarians who had gone over there in the 1940s and studied the Dogon. And to his amazement, he discovered that the Dogon not only knew that Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, it's not a planet, the brightest star, had this binary They also knew the correct elliptical orbit. They knew it was a much smaller star, and they claimed that the people, ancestors from this star, had visited them, and a god called Nomo, who was a semi-aquatic god, a hermaphrodite. And every single year, the Dogon are given cosmic upgrades through space from the planets, from the star Sirius. Now, this was like incredible to me. How these people who didn't even have telescopes knew this stuff about the Sirius B and the mystery of this the star that the human eye couldn't see. But they knew other things. They knew that they knew that Jupiter had 4 satellites, and this was first discovered by Galileo when he built his own telescope. And before that, nobody knew about it, as they did. And they have this belief that they are connected to these space beings from the Sirius B star. Now, not only did they determine that correctly, but also said the orbital trajectory. So when the book was released by Robert Temple, it became a sensation. Even mainstream newspapers and reviewers gave it a very good review. They said, this is truly incredible. In stepped Carl Sagan to try and take it down. Now, Carl Sagan's assertion was that these French anthropologists had met with the Dogon in the 1940s, gave them the fundamentals of astronomy, and then the Dogon just gave it back, and that was all put to sleep as being the end of the story. But no, it turns out that the Dogon, there was records of the Dogon having said this 400 years previously. And as a group, they also had connections to ancient Egypt. They had very similar kind of religion to that of ancient Egypt, although they were thousands of miles away, 2,000 miles away in Western Africa, in Mali. On top of that, over the years, people have tried to debunk this story by saying similar things. I mean, I saw one hilarious video today where one guy from a few years ago tried to debunk the story, and literally he was torn to pieces in the comments section. They said that there was one of these classic things that the debunker was debunked. And so the Dogon represents a tremendous mystery, not only in of itself, but what's also remarkable is how similar it is to H.P. Lovecraft's mythos of Dagon worshipping outer space beings who are also aquatic and who also manifest as the deep ones on Earth. So there may be a great story here in the Dogon story, and there'll be also similar stories around the world in India and Japan of semi-aquatic space beings from other realities and planets who make contact with these tribes. Now, the Dogon are currently being forced converted to Islam in their own country, and it's quite possible that within 20 years there'll be no Dogon left. They're the last great pagan tribe. They were the last great pagan tribe of Western Africa, but there's lots of forced conversions to Islam going on right now. So it's one of those tragic stories as well. But Robert Temple's book changed my life in many ways, because it also made me think of space travel in a different way, as a form of consciousness, rather than like actual spaceships. And this is how the Dogon also described this, especially to get these annual downloads from Nomo and the space gods from there. So, I mean, it's just one of those things that is just, you have to say, there's proof that the paranormal exists. There's proof that there's indigenous people in Western Africa and other parts of the world have a connection with the world. Also, Carl Jung used the Dogon to describe the concept of soul loss among tribes, and also indigenous tribes, and also free association, where their consciousness works on a different level. This may be also why the Abrahamic religions are trying to always shut down native peoples, because they actually have these ability to actually communicate with other, states of consciousness or forces and beings. But the Dogon, the Sirius mystery, Robert Temple, that's it. Just stunning. I don't know how anyone could really debunk something. You can't. It hasn't been debunked yet, and I don't think it ever will. And I think it's an absolutely legit story. So what do you think of all that, Sarah?
Well, I've got quite a lot of things I want to go through about that with you. But before I do, I've just got one question to ask you first. So Sirius is in the Canis Major
the dog star
constellation. Yeah, the dog star. So you've got the dog star. where you get the term dog days of summer. So is the Dogon tribe named after the constellation Canis Major, or is Sirius named the dog star after the Dogon tribe?
No, I just think it's complete synchronicity, one of these magical things. It's called Canis. Yeah, it was named that by the Romans. So, I mean, nothing to do with them. I just think it's like the Lovecraft mythology being so similar. I just think it's one of these remarkable things that proves the collective unconscious is real.
Right. And I watched a video of yours. You shared it not long ago, where you talked about the Dogon and the new Sirius. Sirius had a binary star, and they said they'd been there, and they are an incredibly advanced civilization, and it would follow that they'd know how to use highly advanced states of consciousness to travel to the stars. And I just wanted to put that in contrast with something that happened recently in popular culture with William Shatner. When he said he traveled to space, he said he didn't like it, and he said the blackness was like a death, or like looking into the abyss, and it was looking back at him. And he said when he looked around, all he could see was blackness as far as the eye could see, and it was like encompassing our little blue planet. And he said he saw death, and that for all his wanting to go there and all the shows he did encouraging it, that he never wanted to see it again, and he'd never been more grateful that he was back on Earth. And he said that that was the only place we should be concerning ourselves with. Now, he went into space physically, and it frightened him. And so to go there using super consciousness, like what you suggested with the Dogon, makes sense to me, that that's the only way for humans to do it, because I don't believe space or interstellar travel is a place for the physical body and earthly physics or earthly sciences. And the shamans know this, and the Dogon knew this, and they know how to do it. So going back to astral travel, if we can travel between places and dimensions by leaving the body when we're asleep, and people do it most nights without realizing it, so why not through highly advanced consciousness? Is it not possible for interstellar travel through outer body experiences?
Yeah, I agree with that. We're not meant to travel far, as Lovecraft said. And I think the Dogon were actually space travelers. And it's as simple as that. They just use the consciousness to go into space. I think the way we travel into space now is incredibly crude. You know, basically put a bomb on their people and blow it up and hope for the best. And the reason why Shatner saw total darkness is because it's daytime. You don't see the stars in space unless you're on the dark side of the Earth, the dark side of the moon. It's daytime all the time. And that's why in the Apollo pictures, there's no stars in the space. It's daytime. It's always daytime. Just like on Earth, you don't see the stars because the sun is so bright. And so that was probably startling to him, because he probably thought he was going to see a vista of stars. And many people have gone to space, and those kinds of things are often shocked, unless they're trained, expecting it, that you don't see no stars until you get to the dark side of the Earth or the dark side of the moon. And yeah, I mean, these people, you know, this whole thing of people being primitive, if you look at their culture, the way they're literally a full-time 24/7, 365 shamanic culture. They don't just have shamanism, the Dogon are shamanism. And that's why they've been anthropologists have always found them tremendously fascinating. Outside the whole Sirius B mystery, they are a remarkable people who almost have a different level of consciousness. And this allows them to do things like contact these other forces of consciousness in the universe. They're in a permanent state of almost shamanism. It's just one of those stories that, and then you have to, you know, without getting too, you know, controversial about it, I always find it amazing that the Abrahamic religions have to capture these people and change their consciousness into the Abrahamic consciousness. You know, there's whether they're Christian missionaries or they're jihadists, there seems to be the Abrahamic consciousness seems to have this thing of destroying the connection with higher states of consciousness, in terms of, you know, only being, you know, associated with this this desert demon from, you know, the Middle East. But I mean, this is one of the great tragedies at the moment. You hear people talk about diversity and they talk about all kinds of things, and yet no one cares about the Dogon being forced converted to Islam. One of the most, we still haven't fully studied them. So, you know, you're going to have a generation, just like the tragedy that happened in our part of the world with Christianity, that we don't know what their consciousness was like. We don't, you know, I could nearly say for certain that our ancient ancestors on these islands and everywhere were just like the Dogon, and they had secrets about the stars and space, that because they still had this sort of free association mind, that they lived in a state of permanent shamanism. And that's how we'll get to, and that's, you know, this has been hinted in numerous movies indirectly and stories and science fiction things. But the only way we can travel is without these bodies. We can only do it by, well, go back to the first subject, something like astral traveling in the literal sense.
And I think the Dogon knew this, and he knew how to go there safely and to obtain the knowledge and learn things about other star systems and bring that knowledge back. And if they've got the key to all this, then of course, then the Abrahamic religions would want that silenced and try to make them extinct, because it's religious dogma that's holding this planet in the chains of primitive thinking anyway. So they wouldn't want that knowledge because it shows that the power's in you or I all the time. It's not in a sand god, a sand demon.
And subconsciously and symbolically and archetypally, it's very important that their supreme being from the stars is a subaquatic or an aquatic being that talks about the concept of going deep into the ocean, which represents a subconsciousness. You know, even in Christianity, Jonah in the belly of the whale, that you dive into the depths in order to reach the heavens. That the depths of the ocean and the far off areas of this outer space are somehow intrinsically linked together. And when human consciousness can find or locate that link, then the human mind expands into an enormous place. I often wonder, is the reason why they know so little about the bottom of the ocean. We've traveled more in space than we have on the bottom of the sea. And it's actually a little bit easier to go to space than it's the bottom of the ocean. But at the same time, too, there's almost like a concerted effort not to go there by the current level of consciousness that rules this planet, because they'd rather go out into space first. They're doing it backwards. The combination of both is what that creates a sense of transcendental, the Stella Maris, the star of the sea.
I made a short video talking about my thoughts on interstellar space travel, and I believe that space contains all the other worlds and dimensions, both physical and non-physical, beyond the realms of visible light, and the space outside our physical Earth, beyond that boundary, contains everything. And when we look through a telescope, I honestly believe that when we look through a telescope, we're looking into what lies beyond this life, and that when we die, we pass into another realm that's housed somewhere out there in space, and what we refer to as angels and demons are entities and consciousness that reside in other realms somewhere out in that endless space. I think that's everything is out there, every realm, every dimension, every world, where you go when you die, everything, it's all out there.
Yeah, maybe I agree with that completely. And there may also be a kind of a transformative thing where the primitive level of consciousness exists at the bottom of the ocean, and we're going through a kind of a journey what started at the depths of the ancient primordial ocean. We're now presently on the land. We'll have probably in millions of years evolve into beings that can float or exist in the cosmos without actually using physical anything, even ourselves.
A bit like Waterworld, but up in the air, up in the cosmos. You know, like Waterworld over the years they evolved.
Well, there's two films. There was one called Fantastic Planet, which was an animation film made It's French-Czech animation film from the early 60s, late 60s, early 70s, I think. And it shows people encountering each other through astral traveling on other planets. And of course, there's the final scene at the end of Stanley Kubrick's 2001, where the Star Child appears. And that's what it was saying, that that's the next level of human consciousness, is to be born as star beings. And, the whole thing of the spaceship going to going to Jupiter was pointless. It was an exercise of how not to do it.
Yeah, I don't, at this moment in time, I don't think we're supposed to be in space at all.
Totally agree.
And I think that's why things like black holes are up there, like some kind of security system to whatever it lies beyond, that we as mere mortals are not privy to know or to understand.
The mind dissolves after you leave Earth orbit. They can barely survive. They can survive just on the levels of Earth orbit, which is basically, free fall. I mean, when the ISS is circling the Earth, it's actually falling towards the Earth. That's what's really happening. That's why they're floating. That's in a state of constant free fall. And so if when you travel to the moon, look at the guys came back. They were all messed up. They were never the same people ever again. We're not meant to go there. We're not meant to go there.
I agree. Through super conscious is the only way, I think. And we're not at that point in humanity where the likes of anybody can do that. It's the shamans. Well,
there you go. The most successful space agency on Earth is a West African tribe called the Dogon, who put NASA, the European Space Agency, and all the others to shame, because they know how to do it. That's the Dogon. Check out the book by Robert Temple. You won't regret it. It's fantastic. And now to the part of the show where Sara applies the Aqua Nostra to wash over our souls, so we begin a new, fresh day. And it is the psychic hygiene.
This week, I want to give you something practical to try, which involves salt. Now, salt has purification and protective qualities, and it can cleanse us physically and energetically. It's packed with minerals, and you can sit in it and you can soak in it, and the natural salt detoxes the body and the spirit. And salt is also a great tool for protection. In fact, it's the tool. You can place it around the house and you can use it in magical practices. When salt's used for this type of work, it's really important that it's pure organic sea salt and not that iodized salt or table salt. Even better is kosher salt, which comes from the Dead Sea in Israel. And there are many ways to use salt for protection or the absorption of negative energy. And I use it a lot in my own practices. And one way that I use sea salt is if I'm going somewhere full of people that I don't know, or if I'm going into a new environment or a hotel, I take a pouch of sea salt and I wear it next to my heart chakra, either around my neck as jewelry or tucked away unseen inside my clothing. And I do this to prevent anybody's unwanted energy or thoughts from penetrating my aura. And then when I arrive home, I empty the pouch's contents into the garden and I cover it over with soil so that the earth can transmute it into something more positive and send it off out into the atmosphere. And it's a really simple thing to do. And it's like wearing this ring of protective salt as a talisman. And I find it really effective. Now, not only that this week, but I also have a great cleansing salt recipe, which was sent in to us from a lovely lady called Lindsay Pringle up in Northumberland. She lives up there, lots of dark skies and beautiful countryside. And Lindsay sent us this recipe because she thought it'd be useful. And it's especially for those who don't have time to sit in a salt bath or for those who prefer showers. And Lindsay says to mix organic Celtic sea salt with coconut oil for a shower scrub to cleanse, protect, and moisturize. Mix 50-50 oil and salt, or 2/3 oil and 1/3 salt, depending on how coarse you would like the scrub to be. Lindsay said she uses it in the shower, and in particular on days when she's going out, when there'll be lots of people around her. And I'd just like to add to that, it'd also be great to use for a good old scrub when you get back home to wash the day away from you. So thanks, Lindsay, for sending your salt recipe to us. Never underestimate the power of salt to help get that psychic sludge off you. You can wear it, you can scatter it around the home, you can wash yourself with it, you can soak in it. The uses for it are endless and the benefits are great. Salt is one of the earth's natural protectors from unseen spiritual forces. And that's my psychic hygiene suggestion for this week.
I couldn't agree more. I've used salt in many situations. I have a lot of knowledge of it myself in this regard. I had a friend back in the day called Eddie. He was Chinese, and his mother used Cantonese salt magic to remove ghosts and spirits from apartments and buildings. She would mix 50-50 sea salt and white rice and scatter it around a room where there was a ghost or an entity, sweep it up into a bag and pour the bag into a river. That was a common one. If you're doing very intense magical rituals inside a building, you've got to surround the exterior of the building in literally bags. I'm talking about seriously bags now. I'm talking about like coal sack level bags of a salt ring around it. If you're doing something really intense, like the Abbot of the Mage, you need this salt. I'll tell you my personal salt experience. About 7 years ago, I was at a megalithic site in Sardinia, sitting at the back minding my own business, and I was attacked by some force. I don't know what it was. It like jumped on top of me. It was draining the energy out of my body like it drilled a hole in me and was sucking it out. I had to go back to the hotel room, and I bought 2 large bags of sea salt from a shop across the street. And I got into the bath and with tons of salt and just continually washed it over me. It's also why people have mental health, and it worked perfectly. It instantly removed it energetically fixed me. It's also a good idea to swim in the sea if you have access to it. That's why it's good for depression. I believe a lot of mental health issues are caused by entities, particularly things like schizophrenia. And I know people who work in the mental health industry have told me this, not just online, but personally. And you can remove a lot of these negative entities by swimming in the cold sea, submerging ahead and going under. And salt is remarkable. That's a great tip. The Dead Sea salt is amazing because it's so thick and dense, and there's also Celtic sea salt. Not as good, but very similar. But never use table salt. It's an important thing. Use the sea salt that's been harvested. And you can also, it's very easy to make salt yourself. It's not hard at all. So if you go to the sea. So great tip there, Sarah. That's an important one. Just one for you all to write down notes on. And that's Sarah with the psychic hygiene.
One other thing, don't use, what's that pink stuff called? The Himalayan salt, don't use that.
No, garbage.
It's all right for putting on your chips, but don't use it in your psychic hygiene or your magical
It's blown out of the side of the mountains with dynamite. It's full of shock. It's like the crystals. Those highly polished crystals you see in the New Age store are useless. They've been shocked by the machines polishing them. They've often been extracted by slave labor, and they've been used dynamite and everything. There's no healing power in those crystals. Get the raw ones yourself, pick them up off the beach or find them in the mountains. Yeah, the Himalayan salt is useless because of the extraction process, and it's pretty. The Himalayan salt lamps are very pretty, and they're kind of relaxing. There's no problem with that, but it's just the mining process is brutal. And our final topic tonight is one that many people have experienced. It's probably one of the most common paranormal, Fortean, supernatural events that people experience. It's really not too rare. And if we haven't experienced it ourselves, we know people have had it. And that's the phenomena of missing or lost time. It's something I've had myself a few times. I've went to places where it seemed to take a long time to get there, usually hiking in the countryside. And on the return journey, it seemed to take no time coming back. And people would say things like, well, it's because you're familiar with the place and you knew what you're seeing. But it wasn't that, because you're seeing it from a different angle. You're seeing it from the return angle. It was literally that it took longer to get there than it did to get back. Sometimes remarkably brief periods of return compared to the outward journey. Now it's just walking, hiking in the countryside. It's a phenomena, the lost missing time thing, that goes right back to fairy folklore. Many people who experience the fairy stray, where they've moved into the fairy time or the fairy world, often are shocked to find out what they thought they were a few minutes away is sometimes many hours and even many days, and in some stories years away from when they left. They thought had passed. I spoke to Travis Walton a few years ago at an event in Texas, who you know from that famous UFO abduction story, Fire in the Sky. And he was a lumberjack cutting logs with his friends in Pacific Northwest of the USA when a bright light came from the sky and he was basically taken into a spaceship, very similar to the communion story we had here not too long ago. And he was missing for so long that even the police were on the verge of arresting all his workmates and charging them with conspiracy to murder. He did show up, and the usual thing was he couldn't believe how long he was gone. So that it's the same phenomena in that sense. Often people who had the missing time experience as adults have had UFO or similar experiences when they were children. It seems to be something that travels with them through their life. And it's not until they have it as an adult that they remember seeing a strange light or a strange shape or something anomaly that didn't make sense that appeared to them as a child. And then later on in life, they experience missing time. It's a very, very, very common thing. And we have records going back forever, especially in the folkloric thing. And it's just one of those things that ties the folkloric aspect of the fairy stray back with the UFO thing. Now, I had a fairy stray experience, which I captured on camera on my phone about 4 or 5 years ago in a forest, and I live streamed it. And it live streamed, and the timing on the camera was fine, but that's not how I experienced it when I was going through it. I'd know this forest like the back of my hand, and suddenly found myself in a part of the forest that I'd never known before. And literally all I had to do was turn around. I didn't go walking far. I didn't go any, it was a new forest, and it took me ages and ages to get back. And I was streaming it on my camera and on my phone to YouTube. And when I got back, it was like no time had passed, a few minutes. But it seemed to me, outside the world of human chronology and the human speed of the human clock, the clock speed of the human brain, that it didn't feel like that. I felt I was missing for ages and ages. So it was a classic fairy stray story that comes with the missing time thing. There's other stories too of people walking through megalithic sites. There is a place called Abbey Court Passage Chamber tomb here in a housing estate in the middle of a council estate in Sligo. And it's in a roundabout. When they built the council estate, they built the roundabout around the stone circle because they were afraid that people, they invoked the wrath of the fairies. And there was loads of stories of people living to this day on that council estate who would walk in one side to cut across the roundabout and then came out in the different direction than what they were heading, and it was hours later. So that's a very common one, going into a circle, a fairy ring, and coming out the different angle than you were walking, and hours have passed, and it only seems like a few seconds that you went through it. So the missing time thing, it is the it is one of the most commonly reported Fortean events, and I'm sure many people, and you guys in the comments, have experienced this. So have you had this experience yourself, Sarah?
Many years ago, yes. I lost several hours. It was a Saturday back in the 90s, and I planned to go out in the evening. And in that afternoon, I'd sat on the sofa with a coffee, thinking about what to wear. And it was about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Yeah, it was 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And I do know that because I heard the church clock strike the bells. And I remember that distinctly. And the next thing I remember is that it felt like 5 minutes or so had gone by, but my coffee was cold. So I went into the kitchen to pour it away, and I looked at the church clock outside, and it was 8 o'clock, and it was still light because it was summer, but it was 8 p.m. and I'd lost 6 hours. And I thought the clock must have gone wonky, or, and it was some kind of a mistake. So I checked the alarm clock and the video recorder, and they were flashing at 0000 like they do when there's been a power cut. So I turned the TV on to see that it was actually 8 o'clock at night. And I had no recollection of where the time went. I hadn't fallen asleep. And I remember making up an excuse of not feeling well to my friends because I was actually embarrassed to tell them what had really happened, because I didn't know what had happened or how it had happened. And it still puzzles me to this day. I do not know where those 6 hours had gone.
Do you have any stories that you can relate with other people?
Yes, I've got one here from a friend of mine. I'm not going to give his name. I'll keep him anonymous, but he's allowed me to read his account. And he says, there's a wood not too far from where I live that I have walked through many times. And after packing plenty of water and my camera, I took off walking to the wood to get to this place where I like to go to be alone. On this particular day, I got there around 8:30 in the morning, and I sat for a while taking photographs. And then I noticed the time was getting on, so I decided to get off and get on with my day. I had one last look around, and I was surprised to see a dust devil whirl its way into the clearing where I was sat. It was blowing a 3-foot twister of leaves up into the air like a miniature tornado. I had heard of these things, but never actually seen one until that morning. It was strange to see something like that on such a calm day, and I wondered if it really was the arrival of the king of the fairies. It came and went, and I got up ready to go, and as I was packing my stuff, I was aware that even though the clearing looked the same, there was a sudden oddness and a change to the atmosphere, and the thick surrounding foliage and bushes looked normal, but they felt different in a way that I couldn't describe. There were only 2 ways into the clearing, and that was the path in and the path out. I looked for the path out, but I couldn't find either of the paths. At first, I thought it was amusing, but as time went on, I started to become agitated and I felt trapped inside. I was confused for a while, and I couldn't recognize anything of where I was. I do believe I would have been stuck there longer had it not been for a Rottweiler and its owner making their way into the clearing and breaking the spell of whatever enchantment I had just gone through. I wasn't aware of it at the time, and it was only when I got back home that I realised it was far later than it should have been, and several hours had passed. I have no idea where those hours went. I cannot recollect them, and neither could I explain where I had been when my wife wanted to know why I was so late home.
Well, funny, but not funny when you consider you're left with a sense of almost violation from the experience. Like your mind goes through all these scenarios of what possibly could have happened to you. And then later on in life, you find out about things like people have screen memories where they have a bad experience, they block it out. You wonder if something like that has happened to you. So it's funny, but at the same time too, what that guy said, you do wonder why, what happened to me.
Yeah, I'd like to know, where do you go when you lose the time, and what would it look like to somebody watching it if it was recorded? Do we actually disappear, or is it our consciousness that's been out and about? Like when we sleep, we can be asleep for 8 hours and it can feel like no time. You know, where did we go in those 8 hours? Our body was here, but our consciousness is in another realm.
Yeah, it's a true mystery.
I don't know. Could it be portals or stargates? You know, could it be portals or stargates? Could we slip into alternate timelines and come back again? I don't know. Fairies.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I'm sure anyone in the comments watching this, let us know. I'm sure you've all had it. It's the strangest thing. And sometimes you can have it in the most bizarre situations where you're waiting for something and you think it's going to be a really long wait and suddenly it's really quick. Or you're waiting for something that's really short and it's really, really long. So time is a strange thing. I think that's why Kronos and Saturn are such powerful elements in the occult, is because it's not just a matter of like measurement of time or quantification of the passing of time. It's almost like a part of the occult experience is to break that Kronos cycle.
They do say that there is another opposite of you in another universe, you know, an alternate universe. So I wonder, could the space-time continuum get things mixed up sometimes and we swap occasionally and then just
that's a good one because yeah, that's a good one because don't they say that the opposite reality flies in the other direction?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that would tie in perfectly with that.
And also going back to the Dogon with the interstellar travel, if fairies or interdimensional beings are coming here, are they taking our consciousness to other realms? And when we come back, the time's passed, our physical body's still here. Would it look like we were just falling, you know, asleep, but we're off somewhere?
There's even the story in Irish mythology of Tir na Og, where they went to Tir na Og for a short period, a few years. When they came back, everyone they knew was old or dead. They had Tir na Og existed a different reality.
Yeah, time is strange. It's very strange.
Well, it doesn't exist really. It's just it's a quantifiable event, but it doesn't actually exist. Everything in the universe is happening all at once at the same time. Our minds just create this chronology in order to make sense of it.
Could you bring the Mandela effect into that time lost, do you think?
I guess you could. I'm just, to my theory of Mandela effect is that the two realities are moving in tandem, and as they're coming closer together, we see discrepancies between the two of them before they finally merge. So I guess in a kind of a funny kind of way, yeah. I wonder when this wave function collapses, will we look back on the last 30 or so years very differently? Wouldn't it be like it was a blink and we were back again in 2001? I mean, it's a weird one, but I do expect as this wave function collapses that more and more people have very strange time phenomena events in their lives.
Have you ever experienced a time slip into another time?
How do you mean?
Like you've been somewhere, you've gone somewhere and it's felt like you're in another time, you know, like you've stepped back in time maybe, or you've gone forward in time.
No, like what, no, but I know Carl Jung had that experience, and it seems to be also location specific as well. There's certain places where you're thrown back in time. One of them is Castle of Versailles, the Palace of Versailles outside Paris. Lots of people walking around there suddenly found themselves back in the 1700s and other times. And I think Carl Jung was crossing a bridge one day and found that he'd gone back in time to like about 50, 60 years. And yeah, that's a very common one in places like Liverpool, where the time slips are all over the place. But that's not the same as with the missing time thing, is because we're here all the time. You know, we're in the spot and we don't notice any kind of changes in the reality around us. Literally, the time is gone, you know, gone.
Yeah, time can speed up and it can go the other way, and things can unusually drag, and it doesn't make any sense. And I guess that's the same kind of thing. It's a time anomaly, isn't it?
Oh, it's definitely a perception related phenomenon. If you didn't have clocks, we'd have a completely different sense of the whole experience.
Yeah, it reminds me of Sapphire and Steel. Do you remember that program?
Yeah, when he went through wormholes in time. Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting program. It's quite good, but I used to be put off by the seriousness of the characters. I remember David McCallum. He was just too serious or something. But yeah, it was an very interesting show.
He did have a brush up his backside. He did. But yeah, there was some great concepts about time in that. Time was always warping, or there was some issue with it. Yeah, I like programs about time.
Joanna Lumley was in that too.
Yeah.
So,
very cool, classic.
So if you have any missing time experiences, you know where to post them in the comments.
It's that time of the week now where we go over to our weather reporter, Thomas, to see if we're going to need our Renfield raincoats this week.
Well, the psychic weather this week, remember last week I said there was a lot of calmness about? Well, it's now, and nothing was happening. It's kicking off. I'm seeing the Renfielding everywhere, and you're probably going to need the Renfield raincoat for the next 7 days or so. I'm seeing tremendous amounts of anger, strange behavior on the roads, and people acting very, very strange. It started yesterday. And so we are in possibly a Renfield supercell about to come up. So be wary, be careful. Do not, under any circumstances, get drawn into fights with strangers or arguments. Just walk away. There's a lot of anger and tension around at the moment. And I believe that we are on the verge of a Renfield tornado, possibly in the next 2 weeks. So keep an eye out for that one, and let's hope it doesn't happen. But stay away from anybody who is confrontational, argumentative, looking for a fight, especially if they're strangers. Heads down, Renfield raincoat on, Renfield umbrella up, and continue on your way, minding your own business. And that's the psychic weather with me, Thomas Sheridan.
Well, you did say last week that we were in the calm before the storm because there was nothing happening, and looks like you were right.
It does. The next 2 weeks should be interesting.
Yeah, the next 2 weeks should be interesting. So just don't get involved in any arguments. Just keep your head down.
Online or anything like that.
I'm all for keeping my head down.
The journey to this location begins in a place where most journeys end, a churchyard. The 800-year-old Edward the Confessor Church in Leek, which sits atop a mound which has been in use for an estimated 5,000 years, where Neolithic, Bronze Age, Celt and Viking evidence has been unearthed. But why the continuous use in the pre-Christian era? This site lies on the spine of Albion, known to lay hunters as the Belinus Line, running from the south coast to the crest of Scotland. The other reason, in my opinion, for its veneration is the double sunset at the midsummer solstice. The churchyard overlooks the Cheshire Plain, and from this point is sighted a promontory rising up from the plain known as Bosley Cloud. At the summer solstice, the sun appears to set twice. Although just an optical occultation of the sun's disk, our ancestors would have considered this highly significant, as we will see later. As we journey to this spot, some 6 miles distant, there are some amazing sights worthy of investigation. This site is the most magical place I think I have ever found myself. Surrounded by a grove of ancient yews, the waters of this well have curative properties to which I can attest. The well came to the attention of antiquarians in the 17th century after an estate worker, John Gorton, was cured of plague. The atmosphere and energy of this place is almost beyond description. On the route up to Bosley Cloud, we pass varied points of interest, such as Templar graves at St Luke's Church in Biddulph, a well where Cromwell is said to have watered his pony, and adjacent to that is a menhir, which has been vandalised by Christians. Extensively quarried in the 17th and 18th centuries, the summit of Bosley Cloud was at least 80 feet higher. A huge rock stack, known as Bully Thrumble, was quarried to build canal foundations nearby. On top of the cloud, there are remains of over 50 slab-sided pit dwellings, and it is said by the locals that these subterranean dwellings were home to the Redcaps, the good people. In other words, fairies. Does Redcap refer to the colour of their hair? Echoes of the Tuatha Dé Danann, perhaps? Celtic mythology is prevalent in the region and was the tribal land of the Gaelic-speaking Cornovii tribe. The River Dane flows at the foot of the cloud, named after Danu. Nearby Lud's Church, Lud being the Welsh name for Nuada, and lastly, the remains of a massive burial court cairn in the saddle of the cloud, called the Bridestones, after Brede or Bridget, daughter of the Dagda. The midsummer sun sets directly over the Bridestones from the viewing point in St Edward's Churchyard, Leek. A minute later the sun is seen again, exiting the side of the cloud to set once more. Clearly the Bridestones were sighted here because of this. Standing on top of the cloud, an Iron Age carving of a face is positioned looking to the Bridestones and the sunset. This view also overlooks Lindo Moss, where the Iron Age remains of bog bodies, Lindo Man and Lindo Woman, were unearthed. This position also gives a viewing point for the midwinter sunrise, which rises above what is locally known as the Shining Tor in the southeast. Again, reference to the Irish Celtic mythology, the Shining Ones. It is also known as the Great Mother. Below this face on the ridge of the cloud are ancient carvings of two concentric repeating arcs. Are they the remembrances of these two diametric solar events? Which leads us back to where we started the journey, Edward the Confessor Church in Leek, which has two diametrically opposed rose windows facing north and south, two representations of the sun. Coincidence? All these sites, and those featured in the Roches and Ramshire Rocks report, are within a 10-mile radius. Added to this, these locations are all in line of sight of each other. Here is a prehistoric landscape that is as diverse, mysterious and significant as any other throughout these isles. What's outside your door?
Okay, we're at that part of the show where we talk about books that influenced us and should be part of your collection too. And this week I have chosen Demons and Demonology, the Encyclopedia of, by Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the Queen of Fortean, the maven of the paranormal, the late greatest female paranormal researcher. She's written several encyclopedias on the occult, include on other similar topics, and the woman's work was incredible. And this is her encyclopedia of demonology. She talked about a personal experience she had with a demon that took place on a flight of stairs in a building once, and that she goes through the history of demons and demonology used in magic, witchcraft. It's loaded with illustrations. It's just one of these must-have books, alphabetical order. There's lots of references to outbreaks of demonology and demonic events through history, the types of demons, how they function, not just the Solomonic ones, but also Japanese and other cultural demons like the Penagagalon in Indonesia, and it goes on and on and on. And yep, it's and like everything else by Rosemary Ellen Guiley, you have to have it. So that's the Encyclopedia of Demons and Demonology by Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Does it mention the usual suspects such as C333?
Let me have a look. We can do online live research. Oh,
Don't like saying the name. I found when we've been talking about him on this show and it's my turn to do the edit, it freezes or jumps when it comes up. So
oh yes, on
he's in it, right?
page 33 of all pages,
No way.
and then 39 to 41 and 40 to. I'll just read the page. I have to read the page 33 section. I have to read it.
I just call him 33 1/3.
No, I can't see. Oh yeah, she just basically mentions Aleister Crowley sacrificed animals to his magical rituals. In 1909, while working with his assistant Victor Neuberg, Crowley had a formidable encounter with a demon named
33 1/3.
in a ritual that involved slitting the throats of 3 pigeons and pouring their blood upon the sand. And she talks about that's really about blood magic, menstrual magic and menstrual blood and so on. You see, that's what the book is way more. It's like the Encyclopedia Divination that I suggested a few weeks ago. It's one of these books that has what it says on the cover.
Great. I might have to get online and have a look for that when we finish recording. Well, my book this week is one that has helped me a lot over many, many years. And it's a simple book and it's called Psychic Development for Beginners by William W. Hewitt. And the book is an aid to developing your sixth sense. And there are 44 practice exercises to work through, all mind exercises. And this is a book that I come back to over and over and over again. And the book covers so much from altered states of consciousness to sharpening your 5 senses, because there's no point in working on your 6th sense if the other 5 aren't being used properly. And it covers developing your psychic shields, which is really important before you do any kind of work like this. Visualization exercises. It covers all the clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudio, clairsentient, all those. Psychometry, telepathy, healing, astral travel is in there. Using psychic ability to solve problems or for dealing with difficult people. It's all in this book, and it's written in a non-airy-fairy way. It's very down to earth for a book on psychic development, and it's an absolute treasure. And I've learned so much from this book. And if it's a subject you're interested in, or you want to develop your own psychic ability, then this is a book that I highly recommend. And it was first published in 1996. It's a lovely book.
I see you mentioned psychometry again. You definitely got an interest in that.
Yes, I like psychometry. I like to do it. Yes. Yeah, probably one of my stronger things that I can do. Yeah. Do enjoy doing that.
And what's the author's name again?
William W. Hewitt. You can see with the
I'll pop a proper image up on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah. William W. Hewitt.
Salutations. So that brings us to the end of Hocus Focus episode, program, edition, whatever you want to call it yourself. Number 11, the magical number that exists outside that of reality. So we're in a kind of magical state. I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. I want you to spread the word, as the Sara, and give us likes, thumbs up, share it around, and so on. And thanks for your loyal listenership and comments. And yeah, thank you. I'll leave it over to you, Sara.
Yeah, and I'd like to just echo what Thomas said. Thank you for watching us every week, and thanks for sharing us and for all the comments and all the shares that you do of the show on Facebook as well. That's really helpful. Keep watching and keep Sundays safe for high strangeness, and we'll be back on my channel next week, and we'll see you then. But before we go, let's do a tarot of the week. And I have drawn a card for this week. I can just get this over here. And this week, not purposely, I've drawn another major arcana card. And this week, it's strength.
Mm.
And in this card,
ties in perfect with the psychic weather.
it does. It actually, yes. And in this card, there's a woman stroking a lion. And even though the lion's a ferocious animal, the woman's tamed it with a calm and loving energy. And the card illustrates that the feminine powers of gentleness and self-control can tame our lower and more violent animal natures. And the woman wears a white robe, which shows her purity of spirit, and the belt and crown of flowers and roses represent the fullest and most beautiful expression of nature. And she also has the infinity sign above her head. And this represents her ability to manifest an outcome when her inner strength is used in a situation and she's keeping the lion tamed. And the hills in the background represent life's obstacles that you can get through if you stay calm and have confidence in your power of inner strength and resilience. So this week, use your inner strength. Take time you need to master your emotions. Be quiet and be patient and compassionate with yourself, and you will find a new confidence. Stay focused on what you need to do and go about your business in a quiet manner. If you encounter people who seem loud and are snapping at your heels, don't approach it with the same energy. Some people underestimate the power of inner strength because it's invisible, but see that as an advantage. And don't be telling people what you think they should be doing, and don't get angry or upset with people if they don't understand you. You can control a difficult situation without using outward force or coercion. No one needs to know it's you calling the shots through your calm, loving inner strength. So in a nutshell, cool your jets. You're much more likely to get through the week and avoid difficult outcomes with a quiet inner strength rather than a loud, ferocious roar.
And there's also a good synchronicity in the symbolism that all over England, in recent weeks, there's been lots of reports of big cats roaming the countryside. The way I would describe the card is like the egg. You hold an egg at the top and the bottom. No matter how hard you squeeze it, you cannot break it. Grace under pressure.
I like that. Good night.
I'm a poet. Good night, everybody.